Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a single dad with a daughter who's turning 5 in August. The past year has been absolute hell. I spent months fighting my ex in court because she tried to keep my kid away from me. Every penny I had went to lawyers, and being on my own made everything 10 times harder. A couple months back, I finally won the lawsuit. My little girl could come home again. For weeks now, she'd been asking for a bicycle. Every time we'd go to the store or pass by kids riding bikes in the park, she'd tuck on my sleeve and point. But after those lawyer bills, my bank account was basically empty. The bike she wanted cost around $65, and I just didn't have it. I felt like the worst dad in the world, having to tell her, not yet, over and over. Last week, I got my summer bonus from work. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to finally get her that bike. Yesterday morning, I took her to the store and let her pick one out. She chose a bright pink one with streamers on the handles and a little bell. You should have seen her face light up when I said yes. The total came to $72 with tax, but seeing her smile made every cent worth it. We spent the whole afternoon riding around the neighborhood together. She was wobbly at first with her training wheels, but she got the hang of it fast. I hadn't seen her that happy in forever. We rode for almost 2 hours before heading back. Around 5:30 p.m. we returned to my place and parked both bikes in the backyard against the fence. I still had to cook, so we went inside. I was planning to make potatoes with peas and carrots with some sausage on the side. Nothing fancy, but my kid loves it. About 10 minutes into prep, I caught movement through the kitchen window that looks out on the side of the house. Some kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old, was just casually walking past with my daughter's brand new bike. My stomach dropped. I dropped everything and sprinted to the front door, praying I'd catch him before he took off. I got lucky. He was still in my driveway trying to figure out how to get on the bike. I ran up and yanked the bike right out of his hands. I yelled at him, asking what he was doing and telling him the bike was mine. I said he had no right to just walk into someone's backyard and take their stuff. The kid looked scared but didn't say anything. I was furious and shaking. I asked him where he lived and if his parents knew he was running around stealing things. He just stared at me with wide eyes. I ordered him to get off my property immediately. He scurried away down the street and I dragged the bike inside my front hallway. My hands were still trembling. I locked the front door and stood there for a minute trying to calm down. My daughter had watched the whole thing from the doorway. She was crying because she'd never seen me that mad before. I felt terrible. I picked her up and held her, telling her everything was okay and her bike was safe. I explained that sometimes people try to take things that don't belong to them, but I would always protect what was hers. Once she calmed down, I went back to the kitchen to finish dinner. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there was the kid again, standing next to this woman who I'm guessing was his mother. Her face was already red. She immediately demanded I give her son the bike back, claiming he'd found it, and it belonged to him now. I told her he'd found it in my backyard, and that I bought it for my daughter just yesterday. I said maybe she should teach her kid not to trespass on other people's property and steal their things. She got even angrier and told me not to tell her how to raise her kid. She said her son would never steal anything and that I was lying. Then she threatened to call the police if I didn't hand over the bike. I actually laughed at that. I told her to go ahead and call them because I'd love to see how that worked out for her. I said I had the receipt and the box and everything to prove it was mine. Then I slammed the door in her face. Behind me, my daughter was crying again. She thought she was going to lose her bike. I had to calm her down all over again, promising her that nobody was taking anything. I told her the bike was hers and always would be. By the time she stopped sobbing, I was exhausted. I went back to the kitchen. Everything was prepped and ready to go on the stove. Just when I was about to start cooking, the doorbell rang again. I lost it. I walked to the door and threw it open, ready to scream at that woman. But it wasn't her. It was 2 police officers. I froze. She'd actually called the cops. One officer was standing with her on the lawn, and the other was at my door. I forced myself to calm down and invited the officer inside. I explained the whole situation to him. I told him how I just bought the bike yesterday afternoon, how we'd ridden it around the neighborhood, and how I'd caught this kid walking out of my backyard with it. I showed him the box the bike came in, still sitting in my hallway with all the packing materials. Then I grabbed the receipt from my wallet. It had my name on it, yesterday's date, and showed I'd paid $72 for the exact bike sitting in my hallway. The officer looked it over and nodded. He asked if I had any other proof, so I showed him the serial number on the bike frame and pointed to the matching number on the receipt. He wrote something down in his notepad. He apologized for the inconvenience and told me I wouldn't be bothered again. He said the woman outside had no case and that I was well within my rights to keep my property. I walked him to the door and closed it behind him with the biggest smile on my face. I peeked through the front window to see what happened next. The woman was completely losing her mind. She was screaming at the officers, waving her arms around like a maniac. I could hear her muffled voice through the window saying that I was a liar and that her son found the bike fair and square. The officers kept trying to calm her down, but she just kept yelling. The more she yelled, the calmer they got. Then I watched one officer pull out handcuffs. She tried to pull away, but they weren't having it. One officer grabbed her arm while the other secured the cuffs. Within a minute, she was in the back of the patrol car. Her kid was standing on the sidewalk looking confused and scared. One of the officers made a phone call, probably to get someone to pick up the kid. I actually laughed out loud. I finally got dinner on the stove. The potatoes took a while, but I didn't care. I was in the best mood I'd been in all day. When everything was ready around 6:45 p.m., I called my daughter to the table. She ran over and climbed into her chair. She asked me if her bike was still there, and I promised her it was right inside and nobody was taking it anywhere. She asked if the mean lady was gone, and I told her yes. The police took her away. She grinned at me with her little gap-toothed smile, and we ate dinner together. After we finished, I let her sit on her bike in the hallway while I did the dishes. She rang the little bell on the handlebars over and over, and I didn't even mind the noise. She asked if we could ride again tomorrow, and I said absolutely. Later that night, around 8 p.m., I moved both bikes into the garage where they'd be safe. I made sure I had a sturdy lock for hers, one of those thick cable locks that cost me $15 at the hardware store. I even took a picture of the serial number on my phone just in case. That bike is never being left outside unattended again. I also took photos of the receipt and saved them in 3 different places. I have no idea what happened to that woman. Maybe she got charged with making a false police report. Maybe disorderly conduct. Maybe she just got a warning. Honestly, I don't care. My daughter still has her bike, and that's all that matters to me. I was 19 when I got the job at a 24-hour truck stop restaurant attached to a motel in a small town. I took the overnight shift because it paid better and the quiet hours suited me fine. Most nights were calm, just me and whoever needed coffee at 2 a.m. The restaurant was falling apart. Puddles on the floor near electrical outlets, exposed wiring behind the counter, equipment that should have been replaced years ago. The serving line was the worst. That's the area behind the counter where we kept all our supplies, dirty dishes, knives, box cutters with razor blades, industrial sinks. Everything dangerous was crammed into this narrow space that customers weren't supposed to enter. Management knew it was bad but never did anything about it. I learned to just watch my step and hope for the best. Then this heat wave hit. Brutal temperatures. The kind where the asphalt gets soft and nobody wants to move. During the day, it reached 45 degrees Celsius, and even at night, it only dropped to about 35. The air felt thick, like you were breathing through a wet blanket. Our restaurant became the most popular spot in town because we had working air conditioning. People weren't even coming in to eat, they just wanted to escape the heat. This Wednesday afternoon around 3 p.m., every table was full. Families sprawled across booths, kids passed out with their heads on the tables, truckers dozing in corners. I didn't mind. When they ordered something and weren't causing trouble, they could sleep there all day for all I cared. That's when this family walked in. A woman, her husband, and their 2 kids. I seated them at a booth near the window, brought over some menus, and took their drink order. Standard stuff. I dropped off their sodas and went to check on my other tables. refilling waters and clearing plates from the few people who'd actually ordered food. I headed back to the serving line to grab more drinks when I spotted him. This little boy, maybe 3 years old, wandering around behind my counter. He was poking at things, getting way too close to the industrial dishwasher. I scooped him up quick and set him down on the customer side of the counter. I told him gently that he couldn't be back there because it wasn't safe. He looked at me with those big toddler eyes and nodded, then ran off. Kids wander, you redirect them. Done. Not even 2 minutes later, I turned around, and there he was again. This time he had one of our knives in his hand. It was dull, we mostly used it for spreading butter, but it was still a knife and he was still 3 years old. My heart jumped. I rushed over and gently took the knife from his hand. I told him again, more firmly this time, that he really couldn't be back there because these things were dangerous and he could get hurt. I needed to find his parents. I scanned the restaurant but couldn't remember which table he'd come from. There were so many kids in there, all looking about the same in their little summer clothes. So I just watched where he went. He toddled straight back to the family I'd seated earlier. The woman was already giving me looks. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I moved all the knives to a top shelf and tucked the box cutter away where little hands couldn't reach. I delivered food to another table, and when I came back, the kid was in my line again. Third time in maybe 3 minutes. I knew I had to say something. I picked him up and carried him over to his table. I set him down in the booth next to his mother and apologized, then explained that her son kept wandering into the serving line. I told her it was really dangerous back there with all the equipment and sharp objects. I asked if she could please make sure he stayed out of that area because I didn't want anyone to get hurt. Her face went red. She demanded to know what I was talking about and insisted that it was a restaurant, so her son could go wherever he wanted. I explained again that I was fine with him running around the dining area, just not behind the counter. I listed off the dangers, the knives, broken glass, electrical hazards. I emphasized that it wasn't safe for anyone, especially not a little kid. She exploded at me, demanding to know how I dared to tell her how to be a parent. I tried to clarify that I wasn't telling her how to parent. I was just asking that he stay out of the serving line because of the safety issues. She cut me off and insisted again that he could go wherever he wanted. Then she demanded to speak to my manager. I explained that my manager wasn't there right now, but she was welcome to call during business hours tomorrow and file a complaint. I added that her son still couldn't go behind that counter. She started screaming. I mean really screaming. The kind where everyone in the restaurant jerks awake and stares. She was yelling about how she was going to get me fired, how I was the rudest person she'd ever met. How dare I speak to her this way? Every sleeping person in that restaurant was now wide awake and watching this unfold. That familiar calm washed over me, the one I developed after 3 years of dealing with angry customers. I told her in my steady voice that she had until the count of 3 to stop yelling at me, or I was going to have to ask her to leave. She kept screaming something about discrimination and terrible service. I said 1. She got even louder. I said 2. Her neck was turning red now, that vein popping out on her forehead. I said 3 and told her she needed to leave now. She shrieked that I couldn't kick them out. I told her yes, I could. I explained that I'd asked her to leave, and if she refused, I'd call the police. She screamed that she wasn't leaving and actually told me to call the cops, like she thought I was bluffing. I pulled out my phone. In a small town like ours, the cops had given me their personal numbers because I had to call them so often. No emergency line at 3 a.m., and the 911 operators were hours away in the city. The local cops knew me by name. While I was on the phone with the officer, she yelled that I wasn't really calling the cops and called me a liar. I ignored her and gave the officer a quick rundown of the situation. Less than a minute later, 2 cops walked through the door. They must have been just down the street. One of them stepped between Karen and me while the other pulled me aside. The officer asked me what happened. I explained everything, the kid in the serving line 3 times, the knife, me asking her politely to keep him out of that area, her explosion. He nodded and said he'd handle it. Meanwhile, the first cop was trying to talk to Karen, who was now screaming at them about how I was a terrible person. She claimed I'd been screaming at her and that I'd assaulted her child. They started gently trying to guide her toward the exit. speaking in those calm cop voices, trying to de-escalate. She suddenly broke away from them and rushed right up into my face. She screamed about how I was going to regret this and how she'd make sure I went to jail for assaulting her kid. I didn't say a word. After 3 years of working overnight at a truck stop, I'd been screamed at by way scarier people than this suburban mom having a meltdown. The first cop got between us again and very gently touched her forearm, trying to move her hand away from my face where her acrylic nails were inches from my eyes, and she punched him right in the face. Everything happened fast after that. The second cop tackled her to the ground and got handcuffs on her while she kept screaming. They dragged her out of the restaurant, her voice echoing even after the door closed behind them. The entire restaurant sat in stunned silence for about 10 seconds. Then everybody started talking at once. Her husband looked mortified. He gathered up their kids, threw some money on the table, and ran out of there without making eye contact with anyone. She punched the cop, over me asking her to keep her kid out of a dangerous area. What should have been maybe a warning in the parking lot and an angry phone call to my manager in the morning turned into assault charges on a police officer. I finished my shift in a daze. The cop who got punched came back later to check on me. He said he was fine, just a split lip. He told me she'd be spending at least a night in jail, probably longer depending on what charges got filed. Growing up in Minnesota, I learned how to handle real winter driving before I could even legally drive. My dad would take me to empty parking lots during snowstorms and teach me how to control a car on ice, how to pump the brakes, how to steer into a skid. When I moved to New York City for college, those skills came in handy during the brutal winters there. After graduating, I ended up moving down to a small town in the southeast for a job opportunity. That's how I ended up being the unofficial snow driver for half the town. See, down here in the southeast, people lose their minds at the mere mention of snow. 2 inches of the white stuff and everything shuts down. Schools close, businesses send people home early, and the grocery stores get cleaned out like the apocalypse is coming. Most folks around here have never learned proper winter driving because they've never had to. So when the forecast calls for snow, my phone starts ringing. I worked at the local Walmart for about a year when I first moved here. The money wasn't great, but the people were nice enough, and I made some good friends among the staff and management. Even after I left for a better job, I stayed in touch with them. The store manager was a solid guy who actually cared about his employees, which seemed rare for a big corporation like that. He had my number and would occasionally call if someone needed a ride or if they were short-handed and needed an extra person to help out. That's what led me to tonight. It was 22 degrees outside, which might not sound that cold to someone from up north, but down here it feels like the Arctic when you're not used to it. The forecast called for a few inches of snow, and already the roads were getting slick. I was home trying to recover from the stomach flu, feeling absolutely miserable when my phone rang. It was the manager from Walmart. He explained that one of their elderly employees was getting off his shift soon. The old man had some health problems, no family in the area, and didn't drive. Usually he either caught a ride with another employee or walked home. But tonight was too dangerous for walking and no other employees were leaving at the same time. The manager asked if I could come pick him up and take him home. Despite feeling like garbage, I said yes. The old man was always kind to me when I worked there, and I couldn't stand the thought of him struggling to walk home in this weather. The manager told me to pull up by the soda machines on the side of the building. It was out of the way, not blocking any pedestrian traffic, and clear of the main driving lane. I pulled up exactly where he said, texted him that I was there, and settled in to wait. About 2 minutes later, someone appeared from the front of my car and knocked loudly on my window. It was a sheriff's deputy, and not just any deputy. This was the one everyone in town knew was a complete jerk. The kind of cop who clearly got off on the tiny amount of power his badge gave him. In a small town with barely any crime, guys like him get bored and start hassling people for no reason. The Walmart manager had actually banned the sheriff's department from coming on the property unless they were called, actively pursuing someone or shopping as customers. That's how bad it had gotten. Normally, I'm respectful to police. I really am, but between feeling sick, the cold, and seeing this officer, my patience was already thin. I rolled down my window and asked him what he needed in the sweetest tone I could manage. He told me I was looking at a pretty expensive ticket. When I asked why, he said I was parked in the fire lane. I explained that the store manager had specifically asked me to park right here to pick up an elderly employee who was getting off work soon and couldn't walk home in this weather. I also pointed out that there was plenty of room for fire trucks to get through if they needed to. The officer got annoyed and said he didn't need me to get smart with him. He didn't care if the president himself had told me to park there. He wanted me out of the fire lane or he was going to empty his whole ticket book on me tonight. I told him okay, but suggested he better move out of the way first. I threw the car in reverse, backed straight up into the middle of the driving lane, and put it in park. To be fair, I wasn't really blocking much of anything. This was the side of the store where employees parked, and I knew the old man was the only one getting off anytime soon. The officer immediately asked what the hell I thought I was doing. He said I was blocking traffic now. I pointed out that he had asked me to get out of the fire lane and now I was out of the fire lane. He called me a smart A and threatened to write me every ticket he could if I didn't leave the parking lot immediately. I reminded him that I was on private property. If he wanted to issue me a parking ticket for being in the middle of the lane, he would need permission from the property owner. I asked if he wanted me to call the owner for him. He said my smart mouth was going to be sorry. He claimed he had tried being nice. He started walking away. I said he could have fooled me. He spun around to say something else, but right at that moment, the elderly employee opened the passenger door and climbed into my car. I gave the officer the sweetest little wave, threw the car in reverse, and backed out of there. I could see him in my rearview mirror yelling for me to stop, but I was already gone. I got the old man home safely, made sure he got inside okay, and headed back to my place. About 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was the manager. He wanted to give me a heads up about what happened after I left. The sheriff had come storming into the store demanding to see the security footage so he could get my license plate number. The manager asked him what made him think he had the authority to harass customers and employees after being explicitly told not to come there unless called. The officer started going off about obstruction and interfering with police business. The manager told him he was trespassing and banned him from the store on the spot. Then he called the officer's supervisor to file a complaint. I thanked the manager for having my back and we hung up. For once, going to Walmart was absolutely worth the trip. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.